Hello, this is R. Rats with Team 4545 League, analyzing the game between Inquisitor and Cabindra. This was played in Team Event 53 in the third round of the playoffs, and the match is tied 1/2 each. So let's see what happens. So generally, black should be happy with a draw. White should try for a win. And I don't know these players' opening preference, but this becomes a Scotch game. And generally, that's not the best opening to play for a win with, because black has many equalizing opportunities available. White could complicate with bishop c4 and try and go into some of the tricky lines that arise out of the two knights defense, and max laying attack, all kinds of things. That's the way to try for a win, but we have to assume that black will know them. But you never know. Maybe black doesn't know them. And I know some people that are fond of defending this position. This kind of interesting move, Queen H4. How many of you have seen that before? The basic idea is that white sacrifices a pawn for development, and I think you go here, and black can't snatch on G2 because of bishop F3. So black has to stop and play King D8. Now, he's won a pawn, but look at his position. His king isn't where it needs to be. It needs to be getting ready to castle, and theory should be giving white an edge on this. But I know some people that are willing to try it. You'd have to look it up and study it on your own. For those of you that are pawn grabbers, you can win a pawn out of the Scotch defense if you'll play this line. Anyway, just wanted to share that with you. But black chooses bishop c5, and this should be just fine for equality. And I don't know all the lines here. Knight b3 is acceptable because it puts a tempo on that bishop, but then bishop e3 is okay too because it develops a piece. And black continues his development and his assault on d4, and then white plays c3. Now, I did want to mention this. As it turns out, both sides are going to end this game with far more time than they started, and black not so much so, but white really. And this is the third round of the playoffs. How can you play blitz chess in the playoffs? But there were a lot of moves played, so it could be that he doesn't spend that much, or he did spend some time earlier. But let's see how it goes and how much of a culprit that becomes. It should be interesting. Okay, so both sides are continuing to develop, and white ends up losing a tempo with this move. I don't know if it's theory, but it gets kicked with knight e5 here in a bit, and the bishop drops back to e2. We'll see. Here it goes. See? So, in effect, white said, I'll play my seventh move, bishop e2, and you can. And if your next move is knight e5, you can have a second move. So, how much time did he spend on bishop c4? Okay, his clock increased 36 seconds, so he spent 9 seconds on that move. Amazing. Well, what can I say? I'll point it out because it's true. Too many players are playing these moves too quick. You have plenty of time on your clock. You're putting the bishop there. You know, it's a natural thing. We're trained to attack f7 from when we're beginners, but it's slightly defended, I would say. The queen's on it. What's white's follow-up on that square? His queen can't get at it very easily, and this knight, it can't get to g5 too easily. So black just gets a free tempo, and he can continue his development. And he does. Now, he may be bluffing. Does he want to castle long? Sometimes it's good to bluff. Don't castle. If you can avoid castling, don't. Let the position dictate itself. Get your pieces out and then castle later. It might mess your opponent's mind up a little bit while he tries to figure things out. Now, I think this is an impulsive move. Let's look at the time on it. 12 to 51, so 39. He spends 6 seconds on this move. Well, let's let's talk about this position for a second. What is black threatening? Anything? No. Everything white owns is covered. Granted, white lost the tempo, but it doesn't cost them the game. What's the one thing I preach? Develop your pieces. So there's two reasonable candidate moves here. Knight BD2 and castle. What is this knight threatening? It's not threatening to go to G4. White has that square under control, right? So the problem with F4 is it's just attacking the knight that white gave that free tempo to, but it's causing a couple of weaknesses in the white camp. Mainly, believe it or not, this bishop on E3. It becomes loose to a tactic here in a little bit, and that's going to end up costing white severely, and you'll see when we get there. So in effect, also what it does is it restricts this bishop's development. It no longer has access to these squares, although it's not planning to go there. It would be taken, but it could very well want to go there later, like say in an endgame. Maybe you reach an ending where this bishop wants to go attack some pawns, and picture everything off the board, and the king's off to the side, bishop to G5 with the idea of bishop D8. Well, you know, that's going to be halted to a stop. So get your development completed first. But he played F4 with 9 seconds thought. Okay, now knight G6. Now black retreats his piece that was under attack, but he has a threat. So white has to deal with that, and the smart thing to do is castle. And I think that's what he does. And 40 seconds, he spent 5 seconds on it. But here, that move is acceptable. But the position is still fairly even. There's not much going on. And here, this is an interesting choice. Queen E7. The queen's giving up theoretically a better square on F6, even though white can't get at it. White would like to get a knight into D5, but with the pawn on C3, that's stopping the maneuver. But what this does is it does two things. It gains a tempo on E4. White has to seriously consider guarding that, because if it falls, the bishop with E3 is loose with check, so white doesn't have time to try to set up some tactics on the E file to counter it and allow the pawn sacrifice. It also clears F6 for the black knight, and black's trying to complete his development. So let's move on. Okay, knight D2. Okay, so logically, you know, it looks like white's okay here, and honestly he is. All 4 minor pieces are developed. He's castled. He just needs to move his queen. It might go to C2, might go to B3, might even go to E1. And then, but C2 or B3 connects the rooks, and white's fine. I don't think he has the greatest game because that pawn on F4, but white's okay here. And now black develops his knight. Now, as I was saying, white should develop his queen. What's he do? And let's look at his clock. 51:55. Well, here he spent some time. Good. Okay, he spent 3 minutes, about 3 minutes on that move, and he found a move that I suggested was quite natural. The pawn was under attack too. I guess the other candidate move was to play bishop F3, and that might not have been a bad choice, because I think black gets a little tactic here, and it all has to do, like as I said, with that pawn being up on F4. And here's the tactic, and this is the most critical point of the game now for white. Now, if the pawn were on F2 where it belonged, this move would not be possible, because white could take on D5, and the bishop on E3 does not hang. So this whole tactic was made possible by an impulsive move that white played. Now, let's consider this for a second. We've got to deal with the bishop. Now, before we look at what white played, let's and how long he took. Let's just discuss this, because this was the point where white basically gave himself a lost game. Okay, if we move the bishop, if we want to preserve the bishop, it only has one square to move to, and that's F2. Okay, but then black can take his knight on d5 and capture on f4. So if bishop f2, we have knight takes f4. And that just gives up a pawn. The alternative, but there has to be an alternative, and here's the alternative that's just screaming to be played, is knight c4. Now, it could get a little tricky, but notice, for instance, black is not threatening b5, chasing the protector away, because now white can grab that knight, and his bishop on e3 is protected. So, here, I'll show you. b5. And like I say, it can get a little tricky, but now the bishop's loose, but it wasn't loose last move. Black couldn't take it. It was guarded. And white gets to deal with the bishop now. Where does he want to put it? Well, if he puts it on f2 again, then he can drop the pawn on f4, or he can just put it back on d2. And he may have to accept some double pawns on the d file, but he's going to have some counterplay on the pawn on c4, and then an open c file to play with. So black doesn't really have any tactics to exploit knight c4, and the b5 is just an impulsive move on black's part. But the game is even here. Now white can stop and secure that bishop on e3. It can come back to d2, which wasn't available to it before, if white wants to keep the bishop pair. But let's look at answer the other question. What happens if black just takes? Okay, well, fine. Now, for those that want bishops over knights at all costs, you've achieved your aim. But those are pretty couple active knights. Now, with the king on the same diagonal as that dark squared bishop of black's, white has a few challenges to overcome, but it's not something that white really need worry about. But now, as I mentioned earlier, white wanted a knight on d5. Now, look at that. Just by remaneuvering his knight on d2, he suddenly has that possibility. And if black castles, white could very well play it. So black is left with some choices here. Does he allow the knight into d5, or does he take c6? Or play c6 and take d5 away? And this is all assuming black seizes the bishop pair, and there's no guarantee that he's going to. So you pick your poison. White's got compensation here. What do you want to play? Let's try c6. Now there's a backward pawn on the open file, right? But it's not all that clear how white's going to access that. So probably the smart thing to do is get the king off the diagonal, so that the two knights can maneuver. Now, assuming black castles, which he needs to at some point, then now the knight has a new square to go to, f5, and we needn't worry about any pins and nuisance checks on e3. And if black takes the knight off with his bishop, white just brings his other knight into f5. He's got taken away the fact that black gained the bishop pair and has an aggressive knight. So, like I say, there's no guarantee that black's going to take the bishop pair here. So let's just look back again on my suggestion. Black's got to deal with a threat. His knight is now loose. Okay, he's got to deal with it. He doesn't have time to castle. So taking the bishop pair, it doesn't really have that much. I mean, you've got the bishop pair, and I'm assuming that's what black was playing for. But white's okay if he does it. But you see, black doesn't have time to castle here, because now there's some tricks. Well, you could try b5 here, but that's all right. We're going to win a pawn. Once we safeguard this bishop, we're just going to go win this pawn. Okay, and we kind of talked about that. I talked about that already. Now white's ready to put his rook on the e file and gain some time on the queen. And what more can I say? So knight d5 was interesting, but it doesn't really gain black a whole lot. But what it did was it basically caused white to just panic, and he played bishop f2, and before we see his time, let's ask a question. If he spent 2 or 3 minutes, he may have analyzed knight c4 and rejected it, perhaps incorrectly for the wrong thing. We'll never know unless he tells us. But if he plays, if he just retreats the bishop, then he's just a reactionary player that wants to preserve bishops, and didn't even notice that the pawn was falling, or felt that it's better to keep the bishop pair, keep my opponent from having the bishop pair, even if I have to be a pawn down. So let's see how much time black took. And he spent 52 seconds, so at least he thought about it. So we can't fault him for playing too impetuously. But now, black just wins a clear pawn. And I don't know if 51 seconds just wasn't enough time for white to make such a decision to give up a pawn so easily. Because now look at his e4 pawn. It's isolated. So he's a pawn down, and he's got a weak pawn. Theoretically, black is winning now. He has to prove it, but black is winning. So he preserves his bishop and overprotects e4. And then now, since white had taken away e5, black finds a good time to go ahead and take it back. And now he's on another bishop, so it looks like black's bishop hungry. And this move kind of proves that well, it doesn't really prove it. It just, maybe white's saying, go ahead, take my bishop. I'll take yours. But black can take it on f3 with check. Let's see if he takes it on f3 with check. If he does, then he's definitely a bishop hunter. Yep, he's a bishop hunter. Okay, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But unless you're actually winning the ending because of a bishop over the knight, a lot of times it doesn't do any good. A knight can move her just fine in the middle game against a bishop. And anyway, like I've said many times, it all comes down to that one critical ending that I presented in many videos. Stoltz versus Kazdan, The Hague, 1928 Olympics, where Kazdan proved that in an open board without a lot of locked pawns, equal pawns on both sides of the board, the bishop beats the knight. And it's in my library. I think it's game 151 or 159. You'll find it. It's in there. It's worth looking at. It's on all the ending books too. Okay, so now black saves his bishop, and white decides he wants to try to make black return it, and black says, nope, I'm going to keep my bishop and lock up the pawns. Now finally black castles. Move 18. It could have castled so much sooner, but anyway, black's still winning this. It's just a simple win, but it's not going to be simple after a while. We'll see. I've already played through this game, so I know what's going to happen. Okay, so now bishop h4 attacks the queen. Oh, never mind. Okay, so f6. Now what black should aim to do is probably maneuver his knight back to g6 and then go back to e5, because that's just such a terrific square for a knight. And then if white exchanges, there may be a pin. You know, this pawn will be on e5, and that knight will be a goner. So let's see what happens. So white saw through the pin. Let's see, how much time did he spend? He gained 30 seconds, so he spent 15 seconds on that move. But it's a good move. I was calling it to be played earlier in certain positions. And there it is. I'm going to bishop hunt. And does he save it? Yep, he saved it. And good. Knight e5, very good. The only difference is now if there's an exchange on e5, then the knight on d4 will not be pinned. So before we do that, let's just talk about this game for a second in a different light. Okay, by that I mean, if you have this position as white, what do you do? Well, the first thing you do is you got to take your time and figure out what to do. So what I'm going to aim for, if I can, if I have white, I would like to trade. If I can, I'd like to trade my knight, one of my knights, for his light squared bishop, simply because I have pawns on white squares, and that bishop can attack them. I want to keep dark squared bishops on the board because black has a lot of pawns on dark squares, and I would like to be able to attack those. So that's one thing I'm looking for. I see the d5 square. I'd like to occupy that with a knight, but that's not so easy now, the way the knights are situated. I've got a rook on over on a1. Where am I going to put it into play? d1, I suppose. I might consider trying to push c4 with the idea of rook a3 and shoveling the rook over on the third rank, but I'm not really poised to attack the king. And one drawback with pushing c4 is it fixes my pawn, and it could be a target. His knight's already attacking it, and he can set up a battery on it, queen f7, or even bishop e8 to f7, and you could even figure out a way to get. You could play king h8. Okay, here, I'll just show you what I'm saying. c4. This is kind of an interesting maneuver. King h8 with the idea of queen f7, with the idea of queen g8, with the idea of bishop e8, with the idea of bishop f7. That's a lot of moves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves to pile up on that pawn, and he's on it would be on it 3 times, so it would certainly tie white down. Very, very interesting maneuver, but that's 5 moves. White has time to do something. He can certainly probably get a knight on d5 easily enough, and while black's going through all that maneuvering. But it just goes to show you some of the things that are possible, some of the ideas, if you just recognize, if you move pawns to certain squares, how they can become fixed and targets. So then you just devise a plan against it. It's all natural. Once you get used to it, anyone can do it. It's nothing special. I just saw this pawn on c4. I said, if I'm black, how do I pile up on it? Well, that's how I do it with the arrows that are on the board right now. My king goes to h8, my queen to g8, my bishop to f7, and I had to go back to e8 to do it, because if I put it on e6, it gets traded off. And didn't I say that that's what white wants? Trade off black's light squared bishop? I sure did. Okay, let's move on. Okay, I get in the main line here. Okay, now knight f5. So it's an interesting move, and it does accomplish much quicker than or what I want to do much quicker. I said white needs to trade off that bishop. Well, he found a way, so that's good. I don't think black should have given it up so much. I've already said that white wants to trade a knight for that bishop. What black needs to do is just hang on to it and recoordinate. Okay. The queen can go to f7 and it's safe. Now, black has to be very careful. He can't push g6 or he's going to lose his queen. But what's white going to do in the meantime? But black, like I say, black can recoordinate here and come out okay. He can remaneuver his knight unless white trades it. He can remaneuver his knight so that it gets to e7, and then we can exchange knight for knight and keep the bishop. But anyway, it just surprised me someone who's a bishop hunter would so quickly give it back. How much time did he spend? Ooh, not much at all. How much was that? Okay, his clock went up 40 seconds. He spent 5 seconds on the move. Okay, well, you can play better if you take your time. Now, it could be his move's fine. It just depends on how white reacts. And now black liquidates some more. So if I'm white, I've kind of achieved my aim here. I'm still a pawn down, but look, I've got a nice bishop. Most of my pawns are on light squares. Most of his pawns are on dark squares. I'm only a pawn down, but I've got some positional compensation here. And now a move like c4 is even more inviting, although it spends a tempo, because, I mean, it can't move again. Sometimes you keep a tempo move, a move you can make later in the game when it comes to your advantage. But c4 is good. It just gets it off the square it was on, the square of the opposite colored bishop, and it clears the third rank. The other rook can then maneuver along it, or either rook. Well, and c4 also stops black from trying to free his game with a little bit with d5. And it'd be great to have a black pawn on d5. Get his pawns on his black squared pawns on the colors of the opposite color of the bishop. So anyway, won't elaborate much more. And black's head in development. White still hasn't finished his. Now that's okay. It probably wasn't necessary because black doesn't really have a threat on the back rank. It's well covered. I'm one for completing developments, so my first inkling is to play rook d1, although white could come into e4 and offer a queen trade, and if white accepts, then a4's got to be guarded. So that's one of the reasons for c4. Okay, anyway, and then black does offer the queen trade, and white declines with a check and chases the queen, I think. Yep, chases the queen. I guess maybe that's why white played h3. He wanted to be able to play rook e1 and attack the queen. Although black's got what he wanted. He got d5 in, and I said that. And white didn't get c4 in, so white's kind of achieved his aim. I mean, black has achieved his aim. Okay, so let me just back up and look at the time here again that white's spending, because he's certainly gaining time. Okay, queen b3 check. For 5 seconds on the move, and black took his time on d5, but it's the proper move. Get it on a white square. Okay, now rook e1 was played with about 20 seconds, but I'm surprised he didn't move quicker, because I think clearly when he played h3 that was his plan. And black's happy to trade queens, but this makes his I think this gives back a lot of his advantage. It makes the pawn doubled, and white actually has some resources here. Okay, so black throws a check in. Although, really, that wasn't necessary to do that. Maybe white's just saying, or black's saying, the more I trade, the quicker I am to win. Why not just take the queen and let white trade? Because if you do, then it develops the black rook. Instead of a rook being sitting there on f8, it got developed. It's ready to go. It all comes back down to that theory of Nimzovich's. Make exchanges to develop your pieces. Okay, don't make exchanges to develop your opponent's pieces. Now, does rook e1 or taking on e1 develop a piece? You're saying, well, it's putting on the back rank. Well, yes and no. The bishops develop wherever it goes because the battle lines are drawn. On g3 it is pressuring c7, but on e1 it can go back to g3 easily enough. It's guarding one critical square, e1, once it moves. The only thing is white doesn't really have his 7th rank covered, but I don't know. Let's just go on. I won't elaborate much on that. And here he should move quickly. Yep, because it was a forced move. But notice how white's gaining time. Now, 55-35. He's gained 10 minutes. 10 minutes. And he's about to gain some more. Okay. So 25 seconds plus 11 is 36. So he spent 9 seconds on a critical move. 9 seconds. And you know, this was what's going to happen now is black's going to get his passive rook activated. White is pawn hunting, and he gives it up. He gives up the idea in a moment because black gains tempos. 9 seconds on the move. White was coming back here, and it all hinged back on this fact that black was in such a hurry to trade queens that he allowed the double pawns. Okay, just simply bishop f2 here. Okay, now that basically says, if you don't take, I'm going to take. But we're going to trade bishops. So black's got kind of an unenviable task here. If he, say, develops his rook, where do you want to go? Let's try rook d8. the idea that we're controlling d3. I believe white can just take this, and now rook f4. And what does black do? Well, he's probably got to admit this game is a draw, because look at those pawns on the queen side. Look at black's pawn plus. It's sitting there on, take your pick, b7 or b6. Okay, let's go back. Okay, bishop f2. What's the other choice? Well, take it, right? Because if you don't take, I will. Now you've avoided getting that pawn doubled, undoubling the c pawns, but instead doubling the b pawns. Now it's black's move. I suppose he should activate his rook, right? Well, it doesn't matter where you go. White's still going back. He's going back and going to attack c4. c4 is a goner. White was in a hurry to take it. He played impulsively. He took 9 seconds and didn't think. And you're in the playoffs. You're trying to win a match for your team, and you've got all this time. What else can I say? I'm just trying to help you guys. Okay, take your time. Consider your candidate moves, and you won't lose games like this, because black has given back his advantage, and white should draw now. Okay, well, let's back up. But well, let me just get right to the position. So white plays impulsively, and impulsive play is and should be punished. How can you not consider a logical candidate move, rook e8, attacking the bishop? How can you not consider that? You have to. You're just playing blind. You know, go play Kriegspiel. They call it. What do they call it? Do they call it Kriegspiel? Yeah, they call it Kriegspiel here. Go play that. And they love to play it at 1 minute too. I can't believe it. Anyway, now bishop g3, and now just walking into a tactic. You're allowing rook e3. We're gaining another tempo. The bishop could have gone somewhere else. It could have gone to h4, for goodness sake. Let's see. What's wrong with h4? Well, you know, black's got some bishop e3s in here, but then white can take. This certainly looks better than just allowing the rook to come to e3 and gain a pure tempo. Anyway. How much time did he spend on it? 11:40. Oh my goodness! He spent 4 seconds. He spent 4 seconds on the move. Because he's look at his clock. 56:11. It goes to 52. That's a difference of 41 seconds, and he got a 45-second increment. He spent 4 seconds on the move. Didn't even think. What was wrong with h4? Is he thinking that black plays g5 and forks? No, there's an en passant capture to stop it, and then f6 is under attack. Okay, well, you play too quick, you ask for it. It's that simple. Unless this was his plan, he wants to give black those doubled pawns, but you're doing that at a price of a pawn. That just doesn't make sense. Okay, now we had this pawn structure earlier, except white was keeping the pawn on c3. Now it's gone. So it's a black advantage, and black figures I'll get this running, and when in doubt, check. Now white can gobble 1 or 2 pawns, but he's got to be careful because of that pass pawn, and he's okay to grab that one. And I think that was just a little hasty. I think. You know, black has this ambition that he wants to queen that pawn. Well, he can queen it. I think just think a minute. Take away a square. King d8. What's white going to do? Okay, how's white going to get his rook back to stop that pawn? Let's figure it out. What can white do? Well, he can check. He can check here, right? And well, actually, he can just take the pawn on b6. That'd be the better way. Let's just take the pawn on b6. Okay, so my idea wasn't as good as I thought. Okay, but I think I'm pretty certain there's almost like a general rule in these positions. Okay, after it's when you have a rook in front of the pawn, and you don't want your rooks in front of pawns, okay, if you can avoid it, you want them behind the pawns. This black rook belongs back on c8. Well, it can't get there, right? But white has the active rook here. But it seems to be a general rule, if you can remember this, that when the pawn gets to the 7th rank, it's not always that potent. It seems to be a little safer when it's back on the 6th rank. And I can't explain exactly why, other than to say that it just takes away another square from the black rook, and it restricts that black rook. You know, you would think you wouldn't want to play rook c2 and block your own pawn from advancing, but when it gets to c2, it's blocked from advancing. So that's the point I wanted to make. Okay, so c2. Okay, rook c7. Now king d8. And I think that's just definitely premature and wrong. You've spent all that time getting that pawn up the board. Why give it up? How much time did black spend on that move? Okay, his clock went up by 16 seconds, so he spent 29 seconds on the move. Okay, let's think about it for a second. It's true you're going to get a new pass pawn, and the war of attrition, you know, as long as you keep trading stuff, eventually you're going to win, right? But like I say, you've spent all that time getting that pawn up on the 7th rank. Why give it up? Why not just improve the position of the king just a wee bit? Now, what's white going to do? His rook has to stay somewhere on the c file, okay? And if it moves backward, doesn't that just get the doesn't that just let the black king come up further up the board? Right now he's cut off. So what does that leave white to do? So it's a pretty easy evaluation to make when you look at the candidate moves, and that's exactly what I'm doing now. Instead of giving up the pawn, what about king d7? Well, white can't really move his rook. And here, I'll illustrate if you're not sure. Okay, let's just keep moving the rook. Okay, check. Now I'm bringing my king up. Where are you going to go? Okay, look how potent that king got. Uh-oh, now that pawn got help. It's going to get promoted here real quick. Okay, so what is that? Since we know the black rook can't, or the white rook can't be moving up and down the c file, what does that leave white to do? He has to keep the rook on c6. So what's that leave him to move? This guy. See him? White's got to start moving him. And when he starts moving him, good things happen for black. Okay? Where are you going to move him? Okay, let's move him to g3. Now, I've got a ways to move here. I've got to come up with a move because black's tied up. Okay? Let's just suppose I play g6. That's as good as any. Now notice that the white king can come to e2 or f2 here, but he can't necessarily go to g2 or e2 because the rook will go to g1 and be taking on g2. Okay, so on g3, g6, and now maybe we do this, and white's in trouble. His king can just shuffle back from h1, I'm sorry, h2 and g3, and that's pretty much all he has. So what does black do in the meantime? Well, he starts shoving his pawns, I suppose. But logically, I haven't proven this. In some respects, I haven't clarified things yet. But it just seems in principle just to give up this pawn, this pawn so willingly, so quickly, was just wrong. Give white a chance to do something wrong here, and black looks fine. If white's not careful, this pawn's going to come up to f4, and let's see how that happens. Okay. White shuffles his king. And now comes f4. Now what are you going to do if you have white here? I've already said you can't maneuver your rook up and down the board, right? You can't. Now, the king's out of moves. If you play g3, You're just going to lose the pawn because you can't retake. Now, what's white's next move going to be? There really isn't a good one. So I'm not saying this is a forced line, but there may be other defenses there, but it just gives white so many chances to go wrong. And white's got plenty of time on the clock, and the game's going fast because white's not taking his time. So giving this up just was just a little too quick. White can breathe a sigh of relief. Now we take here. Now he returns to the scene of the crime. And now what this does is it basically black's only going to be a pawn up, but most of the pawns on the queen side have disappeared. So now the rook's on the side of the pawn. This should be a theoretical win, but it requires technique. And now look at the counterplay white's getting. He has time to run over there and grab that pawn. And suddenly the game is even. It's now a draw. What was a black win has now become a drawn game. But it's going to require some technique. So black holds on to his pawn as long as he can. And that's premature, I think. I think maybe, let's see, how much time did white spend on that move? 42 minus 15 is 27. He spent 18 seconds. Let's just see if we have time to grab that pawn. Okay. Well, wait a minute. This one's a loose. No, it's okay. I apologize. Okay, G4. But if black can trade off all the pawns, or white can trade off all the pawns, he's going to get a draw. Trade off the pawns, get the king over to the queen side, and draw. So let's see what happens. Now, as I was saying earlier, black needs the rook behind the pawn, but it's not clear how he can do it. What he needed to do here in this position was keep the rook next to the pawn and activate the king. But it's probably, the position is still drawn, I think. But there's some interesting endings I've seen where the rook stays next to the pawn and it can't advance. White will have a rook behind it. This rook will be behind it there, and then black tries to infiltrate with his king. But looks like white can get some pawns off. Maybe he'd have to sacrifice a pawn. But this should be a drawn game. It should be. Anyway, let's see what happened. And this is smart. Gets behind the pawn. And now the rook's in front of the pawn, where it doesn't belong. The rooks need to be reversed if you're black. And then now it's time to start getting the king over to help. And now it's time to infiltrate with this king. And this is a good move. He played it kind of quickly, but it's a good move. He spent 27 seconds on it. Good for him. Okay, or 24 seconds rather. Because if black advances his king too far, the f6 pawn falls. And matter of fact, white's threatening to win it with rook e6 check. Right? Now why doesn't he play it? Okay, let's see. Rook e6 check. Well, that drives the king closer. But look, suddenly white's got some interesting counterplay. And the black pawn is 4 moves from being a queen because it's got to move 3 times, and the rook has to get out of the way. So what's wrong with trying this? My gut instinct says white's going to draw this. If you're bringing the king back, the rook just resumes his duties over here, and white keeps his king on g2, and eventually finds a way to either support these pawns. If black goes down to the last rank, it activates the king, and then the king can get in front of the pawns. I don't know. It seems like this is just a clear-cut draw, and black's going to have to be careful, or he might end up losing it. So that's what happens when you don't take your time and consider candidate moves. Okay, so it gets interesting here in a minute or two. Now the pawn gets going. Now this is the key point where the game turned. What's going to happen is it almost looks like black's winning, but white has a drawing resource. Now if the white king approaches the pawn on the queen side, and that's what's going to happen, the black king is able to enter into the white position and not only win both pawns. He's a pawn down on that side of the board. He's not only able to win both pawns, but he's able to keep the opposition and win the king and pawn ending. But let's quiz you here. I've kind of given a clue. White to play, and I usually say do the best I can, but this is where white missed a draw. White to play and draw. Pause the video. What are your candidate moves? White to play and draw. Okay, you've come back. Okay, let me show you what he did do. And that loses. But the drawing move, surprisingly, is king d4. And you say, what does that do? Black just plays a2, and there's no stopping a rook check and then the pawn queens. Well, there's a difference here. And the difference is white now has the opposition. And white's going to check that black king. Okay, black pushes the pawn. White's going to check that black king back out of play. Now here you can come back and draw. So just kick him out further. And now send the king over. And now you get the queen. And then the difference here is the position of the black king. It's not able to get up there in time and get the win the pawns and get the opposition. And here I'll verify it. There's two paths. Probably the short path is king here. Get the king over there. And by the skin of our teeth, we've saved the position because white now has the opposition. Now let's compare that with what happened. Okay. So he played king d3. It looks like a natural move, but the problem is that it will become apparent in a moment. So you see we're trading off. Now in the other position, this black king was back on e7. There's a big or f8. There's a big difference. White starts getting his king over. Well, he doesn't have to go to d1, but if he goes to d3, you can see that after. Here, let's just back it up. If he goes to d3. Notice the position of the white king. In the other example I showed where the draw was, the king was on e3. He's not there now. He's on d3. He can't get to f3 and get the opposition. So from here on out, it's basically just a one-man show. The one man being black, he's going to queen his pawn and win. Let's just go back and look at the critical times here. I just wanted to. So, how much time did white spend missing the draw? Okay, 69:04 to 69:36. 32 seconds were added to his clock. He spent 13 seconds on the move when he still had 69 minutes on the clock. Now, had he sat there and spent 30 minutes thinking, there's a good chance he could have found the draw, just based on everything he knows about chess and his ability to calculate. What was the hurry? Why did he show up to play the game? if you're not gonna take your time, why are you playing? What more can I say? It just goes without saying. But anyway, make a long story short, let's get back to where we were. And now white just made it easy for black and the pawn queens. And do I need to see more? I don't think so. Let's just go to the final position. And here white resigned at move 77 because it's obvious he's going to be mated. So there was a chance. There was a chance for white to hold this, and the clock killed him. And so it was good. It was a well-played game. There weren't that many errors. You can see the players know something about chess. They're reasonable players. They've just got to work a little bit on a few things and to become better players and move up to the next class. So I'm glad this game was nominated, and I'm happy to make this video. I want to thank everybody for their time that took to look at this, all 51 minutes of it, and there's a playoff next week, so it looks like there'll be at least one more video. So thanks everyone. Take care.